60% mental and 40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to the BIA Podcast. It is Monday, the start of a new week, and I am, of course, your host, Kevin Noon, here on the Buckeye Grove Instant Access Podcast, or BIA for short. I'll be bringing Joseph Hastings, our fantastic recruiting analyst, in a second. I would probably want to talk a little bit about basketball, but I'm going to stay away from that right now. We've got the rest of the week with Ohio State wrapping up the regular season over the weekend, this upcoming weekend. Losers of three very different type of outcomes, with the last one, most recent one against Iowa, being the most troubling in terms of Ohio State not being competitive at all. But we're going to talk about that in a later show. When I have Joseph on, that means we are going to be talking about Ohio State football recruiting, a topic that most Ohio State fans love talking about. And when we dedicate a show entirely to recruiting, it means that there's some news out there. And this weekend, Ohio State picking up a big commitment. Kyion Grayes, a Rivals 250 wide receiver out of Chandler, Arizona. That's the Phoenix area, commits to Ohio State. Big time news for the Buckeyes. Joseph, welcome to the show, and just the excitement for Ohio State fans and coaches alike in the landing of Grayes.
Hey, Kevin. Yeah, it was a great weekend for Ohio State fans. Kyion was somebody that we knew was probably going to join this class. We submitted a future cast for him back in December after he decommitted from Arizona. But he decided to give his recruitment some time, waited till after the Buckeye season, and eventually wanted to get on out to Columbus and set foot on Ohio State's campus. But once he did, even from the very beginning, him and I texted the first day that he got there on Thursday, and he said, "I love it here." And that was just in the first day, not even the first full day of him being, at the school in Columbus. He just loved everything about it as soon as he arrived. And from that time, I kind of knew that, commitment would be imminent. But the fact that he did it before even leaving, Columbus and leaving Ohio in general and heading back home, the fact that he committed that morning on Sunday just goes to show how blown away he was from that visit. So great news for Ohio State fans, adding to a class that is shaping up to be, one of the best that I've ever seen, at least. Talking about this first half here of the 2022 class, what they've been able to do, the prospects that they've had, that they've been able to add 9 Rivals 250 prospects, 3 of them being 5 stars. Just absolutely incredible what Ryan Day and his staff are doing right now.
Yeah, and when we look at Grayes, 6'1", 170 pounds, and I had the opportunity to talk to him in person on Sunday. So, you sit there and you stand next to a player and you're like, all right, is it a real 6'1"? Is it a press guide 6'1"? Is he like 5'10"? No, Grayes has every bit of 6'1". Has moved up, to number 157 in the country. He was not ranked in the ranking cycle before that. So, it seems that he's been doing enough to, get the notice of the evaluators and whatnot. So that's all well and good. A player that I've heard some comparisons to with Kyion Grayes, and when we do these comparisons, and people who have followed me on Buckeye Grove through the years know I hate player comparisons, because you're never going to be the next whoever. You're going to only be who you are. So it's not fair to do that. But, I've heard a lot of Chris Olave talk out there. And Chris Olave, a Southern California guy, was certainly overlooked as a 3-star recruit. Grayes is now up to a 4-star. Even to the point of where our own Adam Gorney from Rivals.com has said that, he sees some comparisons there too. Maybe Olave was a little further on at this point, but that Gorney certainly doesn't want to, as he put it, mess up the ranking of Grayes the way that he did of Olave. When you get the opportunity to pop in his huddle tape, what do you see, Joseph?
Yeah, I had this question posed to me back in December when it looked like Kyion could potentially be committing to Ohio State soon. I said that Chris Olave was the person that I would compare him to. Grayes is an explosive playmaker. Just based on the film that I've seen, he can turn short to medium catches in the big games. And one of the reasons why he's been able to elevate himself in the rankings and get to that number 157 spot in the nation after not even being in the Rivals 250 prior to the last update is that he's an excellent camp performer. He's going to be somebody who dominates on the camp circuit just because of his height, his physicality, the way he can get separation on his routes. I thought Olave is a little bit more smooth when it comes to his route running when doing the comparison between the both of them. But, Grayes is somebody who's going to have another year of development at the high school level. And then once he gets to Ohio State, he's going to be coached by one of the best in the country in Brian Hartline. So I definitely see his route running improving and getting to the level of Olave. And the comparisons even go down to the height and weight because we had Rivals did at least. Chris Olave at 6'1", 170 pounds coming out of high school. We've got Kyion Grayes at 6'1", 170 pounds. So there's just a lot of similarities in terms of their measurements, how they play the game. Kyion just looking past the tangibles and at its intangibles, you had a chance to interact with him and speak with him. And I bet you got the same impression as I did. He's a good young man, very respectful young man, approaches the game in the right way. He has this kind of swagger to him, but it's what I would call healthy amount of swagger. It doesn't border on cockiness and thinking that he's better than everyone else. He's very comfortable with his skill set and what he brings to the table, and he knows what he can do. But I just like everything about Kyion, both on the field, off the field. I've spoken with him multiple times in the past, and yeah, I just think he's going to fit the culture in Ohio State and also what they like to do in their offense really well.
Yeah, I had the chance to talk to his mom out in front of Ohio Stadium as all the websites had the opportunity to do one-on-ones with Kyion on Sunday, or I guess it was Saturday, and Mom was obviously pretty cold standing out there. I mean, heck, it was in the upper 40s. I think for those of us who've been in Ohio for a while, after coming out of the 20s and the teens, it felt like a heat wave or whatever. But we were talking about Kyion, and she was talking about the fact that he takes everything in stride, and as Joseph mentioned there, not just this huge self-promoter type or anything like that. So, I think all of that is, kind of in line. When you look at Ohio State recruiting, and I'm going to look at from the 22 aspect first, then I'll bring in the 21 class too. Just for 22, where you had Grayes and Caleb Burton, certainly a tremendous start for the receiver class on a position that Ohio State has been recruiting very well here recently through the years. But I've not looked at all the national classes yet, and we're still so early. But I challenge anybody to have a class at this point already that's up to the 1-2 punch of Burton and Grayes.
No question about it. I mean, it's just incredible what Brian Hartline has been able to do. Just looking at the players that he signed in the past cycle, previous cycle as well, bringing in Julian Fleming, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Then in the 2021 cycle, signing the top-ranked wide receiver in Emeka Egbuka, while also being able to add Jaden Ballard and dip into enemy territory and get Marvin Harrison. And then you look at a guy like Caleb Burton. I know he's coming off the season in which he missed his entire junior year, but he's one of the most explosive wide receivers out there. He has long, great strides. Can create a lot of separation as well in his routes. And then just teaming up with him and Grayes at the next level, Ohio State is really set these next few years to be what Kyion Grayes told you in his interview, which is wide receiver university, and to turn out top prospects at the position on a yearly basis, which in turn allows you to continue recruiting great at that position. Because if you have a guy like Quinn Ewers, or Kyle McCord throwing you the football, and you have an offensive line that can protect them, that's an appealing possibility for any top wide receiver in the country. Just to have the chance to play with quarterbacks of that nature and an offense that is pass friendly. I know they're probably going to shift more toward the run game, emphasizing the run game this upcoming year than they did this past season, at least in, looking at when you're having a starting quarterback that's going to be, who hasn't taken a college snap before. They're going to definitely focus more on running backs. But this is, what Ryan Day would like to be a pass-friendly offense. It's going to continue to attract top wide receivers. And, I've been told that they're not, Ohio State's not done recruiting when it comes to 2022 wide receivers. So even with this great 1-2 punch, Kevin, keep an eye out. They could potentially add a third wide receiver before it's all said and done.
And you're listening to the BIA Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Joseph Hastings, and we are talking Ohio State wide receiver recruiting, and more specifically, the addition of Kyion Grayes over the weekend. And you kind of led right into what my last question for this segment was going to be. What's next? I mean, Ohio State certainly has gone out there and thrown some big time offers out there for top wide receivers. And, they've hit on a couple of them for certain. They've seen some guys that maybe that they certainly wanted, like a Luther Burden or somebody like that, who have opted to go elsewhere. I mean, a long ways to go as we understand how recruiting works, or Armani Winfield, who's decided to stay home at Texas. Without a ton of wide receiver offers out there with, non-committed kids at this point, CJ Williams out of Santa Ana, Koji Antwi, I might be mispronouncing that name, out of Suwanee, Georgia. Not a lot of offers out yet at that position, but we haven't even got to camps with whatever that may or may not be. What do you see outside of the fact that Ohio State may not be done at that position? I mean, what is left out there?
Yeah, so you brought up C.J. Williams out of California. If you asked me a few weeks ago, I probably would have said Ohio State was, maybe top 3, top 5. I don't believe they're going to be able to dip in and, land him. I'm not going to, make any, predictions when it comes to that because, like you said, recruiting is such a long process. But I just don't see him winding up in this class at this time. I thought Texas really benefited from getting Malik Murphy. He's really close friends with CJ, and then also USC, is in the mix since they're just a few miles away from him. CJ was also born in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, so the Crimson Tide will obviously be in the mix there. So I think it's pretty unlikely that Ohio State lands Williams, although they're still continuing to recruit them. You mentioned Luther Burden, and he's very interesting because he committed to Oklahoma back in October without ever visiting Ohio State. What if he potentially gets out to Columbus, likes what he sees, and maybe decides to change his mind? I spoke with a source close to Luther a few weeks ago, and he said that when talking about Luther, the source told me that he's somebody who you have to keep your ears and eyes open to when it comes to his recruitment. You just never know what's going to happen. Ohio State is continuing to talk with him on a weekly basis. So he's a 5-star prospect, committed to the Sooners, which obviously also has another pass-friendly offense. But I wouldn't shut the doors already on him just yet. There's still about 10 months to go until he can officially sign. So I'll keep Luther out there as well. Kojo is probably the most likely one out of the bunch that you listed, just because not only is he uncommitted at this time, but he's really been prioritized by Ohio State staff ever since he got offered back in November. He's been a recipient of multiple recruiting edits. When they made it to the championship game, they had actually sent him a couple of them too. So he's continuing to stay in touch with Brian Hartline. The Georgia Bulldogs seem to be the program trending for him at this time, but I very much think Ohio State's in that kind of top 3 group when looking at his recruitment. So, in my opinion, Kevin, I don't believe Ohio State is in a do or die situation when it comes to we need a third wide receiver in this class. I think they'd like to have a third wide out, but it depends on who that receiver is. And I don't think they're going to overextend themselves here because, as we mentioned before, it's not a position of need for them right now. So they're in a kind of luxurious position. They can kind of pick and choose which options they want. So we'll keep an eye on those players. I also mentioned before in the previous goal session that Caden Saunders, an in-state prospect who's committed to Penn State, that he is in touch with Ohio State staff. So he could be somebody that, potentially is in line for an offer down the line. I think it kind of depends on what happens with Kojo and Luther and how Ohio State feels about them. But keep an eye out for Caden Saunders as well.
Yeah, and Caden's somebody, too, that I think that a lot of programs have looked at him on defense as well. And, it's sometimes a guy falls in love with one side of the ball or the other, and sometimes schools see them at a different position. I mean, obviously Penn State certainly likes him at receiver, so you just don't know there. And honestly, until we get to the point of where there is off-campus or on-campus in terms of school camps or whatnot, evaluation, it's hard to sit there and really know what a wide net is going to look like. I mean, you could sit there and see a lot of programs out there that could have 350, 400 offers out there right now, but that's because they need to. They need to have that many offers out there. Ohio State, certainly not a school that's going to throw a ton of offers out, especially the in-state offers, because what happens if you offer a kid from St. Ignatius or whatever, and he's like, you know what, I'm in. You can't slow play a kid like that. You do that, you mess up your relationship with that school, and that's something that could go on forever and ever and ever. So it'll be interesting to see where that all goes. But on the other side of a quick break, we're going to talk about a couple of other positions of need, just some highlights from Joseph's excellent Skull Session report from this weekend. If you're not a member of BuckeyeGrove.com, be sure to sign up so you can get those every week. But we will talk about that here on the other side of this quick break.
Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com.
Welcome back to the BIA Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Joseph Hastings. We're talking some recruiting here. One thing that you had in the Skull Session, which was very thorough on multiple fronts, was talking about running back. And Ohio State's certainly coming off a tremendous class with Trevion Henderson and Evan Pryor. You talked about Dallin Hayden in this. Where do you see running back recruiting standing right now? Because Ohio State certainly has irons in the fire with all of the top kids, or most of the top kids. Ohio State certainly seems to be among the top schools with several of these guys. But, at this point here on the 1st of March, nobody has jumped on an offer yet. But that's, again, that's not uncharacteristic. Just kind of, some quick thoughts on the running back position.
No doubt about it. And just starting off with Dallin Hayden, it was a really good conversation that I was able to have with him last week, very enlightening. We didn't even talk about Ohio State. This conversation was mainly about his rankings and him being on the camp circuit, and how that may be affected due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But one thing that he told me just out of the blue was OSU is one of my top schools. And he's made a mention. He's told me that before. He's mentioned it several times in the past, and he reiterated that the Buckeyes continue to be in his top 4. The in-state Tennessee Volunteers are up there as well, along with Notre Dame, and the Oregon Ducks. So Dallin Hayden, I think it was a little bit of a question as to whether or not he would be a take for Ohio State at this time. But during our conversation, he told me that if he wanted to commit hypothetically tomorrow, that they would accept a commitment from him, which is interesting because, what we've been hearing is that this could be one running back class. It seems like it's trending that way, especially since they really haven't offered a whole bunch of prospects at the position at this time. It's not like last year's cycle where you knew they were going for 2 and they were able to land Evan Pryor and Trevion Henderson. It just seems likely that they're going to take one running back. So Dallin Hayden's definitely up there. I think he's top 3 on their board. The other 2 that I would say are up there are Nicholas Singleton and Dallin Hayden. Starting with Singleton, he's somebody that would just be a great prospect to add for multiple reasons. One, he's a solid running back, very explosive, can take it downfield. And then also the fact that you could go into Penn State for the second cycle in a row and lure out another top prospect like him. They're also in pursuit of Eni White as well. If you can do that, it bodes well for building upon that brand and, being able to dip into enemy territory and have success and establish those relationships, as we talked about earlier in the podcast. And then switching over to Lamar Olsen, he's very interesting because his recruitment has kind of been a slow one in terms of, he's not releasing any top schools. He hasn't locked in a commitment date, but he's made it known that he can commit at any time. And he recently tweeted out, "The time is coming." Bennett Christian, Ohio State commit, tweeted out, "Go Buckeyes" in response to him. I think Ohio State is really in his top 2 or top 3. I legitimately think so. Penn State, North Carolina, Texas A&M, Georgia Tech, they're all also vying for his services. But I view Ohio State as a top 2 or top 3 school for him. It just depends on whether or not he wants to take visits before committing. And if he does, that could extend his recruitment all the way out until, mid-June, late June, or potentially even into the fall. So those are the 3 prospects to look at when it comes to running backs. Yes, there is Gavin Sawchuk out of Colorado, but I don't think that he's going to be heading to Ohio State. There's also a couple of other offers, such as Emeka Megwa out of Texas. He's still continuing to keep in contact with the Buckeyes, but the main 3 that Buckeye Nation should be paying attention to right now are Dallin Hayden, Lamar Olsen, Nicholas Singleton. And it's kind of a toss-up as to whether or not they'll be able to land one of them. I do think that they are in a really good position right now for Hayden and Olsen, and it kind of remains to be seen with Singleton because, the Nittany Lions really made a push for him at least late in last year. Ohio State was labeled as the leader in July of 2020. Then he told me that it was Penn State and Ohio State up at the top. So it kind of remains to be seen with him, but I do like where the Buckeyes stand with each of them. I think they're a top 3 school for all 3 of those prospects.
Right, and it really just comes down to, if all 3 of those guys have the green light that they would accept the commitment or whatnot, just kind of seeing what the timing would be there, and that's what makes recruiting interesting. They might they might favor Singleton a little bit more, but is there a big enough difference between Alston and Hayden and Singleton or whatnot? I think that only Ryan Day, and obviously Tony Alford and guys like that may have the idea, but you can't run the risk of trying to have a top guy pump the brakes just to see what's going on with somebody else, especially if the margin is just so small between them. If you have one guy who you have, night and day above everybody else, maybe you go there, but I don't know from what I've been watching that the margin is that huge between Singleton, Hayden, and Alston, and then obviously you'd mentioned Sawchuk, and then maybe a little bit below that Emeka Megwa out of the greater Fort Worth area.
No question about it, and they all have kind of similar playing styles, yet also different. Lamar Olsen is kind of like a bowling ball. He's going to absorb a lot of contact. He's gonna really pick up a lot of yards after he gets hit by defenders. And he doesn't have necessarily the breakaway speed as we've seen from like an Ezekiel Elliott in the past, but he is a bruising running back. Whereas Nicholas Singleton has drawn comparisons, at least from the staff, to Elliott. I definitely think Ezekiel was a better prospect coming out of high school than Singleton was, but he's somebody who can, take it. He's a home run threat. Anytime that he gets the football, he sees the lanes really well. He has really good vision. And then with Dallin Hayden too, he kind of has a similar skill set. So it kind of really depends on what the Buckeyes feel like is best for them in this 2022 cycle, who they believe will fit their system well. And I think they like all 3 of these prospects, but at the same time, you're only really going to probably take one of them. So it may be a who wants in first kind of basis, how they judge this by. But at the same time, what if Dallin Hayden commits in, let's say, a month, and then Nicholas Singleton in November says, I want to choose you all over Penn State? Would the Buckeyes accept a commitment from them? I don't have the answer to that right now, just because there's so much to be seen, especially how this 2022 class takes shape. But that would be a very interesting situation to see whether or not they would accept a commitment from one of those other top 3 guys if another one decides to go in, let's say in the spring or something like that. So it's still kind of up in there. They have other priorities that they need to address, specifically when it comes to defensive back, and we'll talk about cornerback here in a few minutes, and also the defensive line too. So it really depends on what the numbers look like and whether or not they would accept a commitment from a second one down the line. So we'll definitely be paying attention to this and keeping you all updated as this year goes by.
And we will jump into corner here in a second, but I want to give my 2 cents for whatever that's worth. And I think that, you have the benefit of if we're talking about somebody who wants to come on board in November or whatnot, we're going to have a good idea of what the current roster of running back looks like in terms of the rotation. And, and I don't want to speak any transfers or, the portal into existence with anybody, and I hate associating names, but, what happens if, I don't know, Marcus Crowley, gets buried on the depth chart, or Steel Chambers or somebody like that, especially when you're bringing in 2 new true freshman running backs or whatnot. You just don't know. So, as we sit here in March, we haven't even started spring practice in earnest yet. You really don't know. So I would say to anybody listening, don't close the door and say that this is 100% a one running back class. I don't think Ohio State needs to go to the point of where it's going to be stretching and reaching for somebody just for quote unquote head count. But if you see a hit to the numbers, I certainly think there's a situation where if one of the guys who's on your we need to take him list says, okay, I'm coming, and he doesn't scare off the guy who commits earlier, you figure it out at that point. But you just don't know. It's what really shows, and I don't want to get into a discussion about this because we've talked about it at length before, the uniqueness of the Henderson-Pryor relationship of why, they wanted to play together. Normally you wouldn't see that type of situation in most instances where you would have 2 guys of that caliber agreeing to be part of the same class, knowing that they were going to be competing for the, exact same carries. But, I digress on that. We're already at about 28 minutes and we haven't even started talking about corner. So I'll get into that one quickly. Will Johnson committed to that school up north, decided to stay home. The legacy, his dad played there. Ohio State already sitting with a couple of corners with Jaheim Singletary and with Jair Brown. So, there are already a couple names in the class, but I think corner is a position of particular concern just when you look at how thin Ohio State was last year when Cameron Brown goes down, when guys are thrust out into positions that maybe they weren't exactly ready for. What do you see kind of at corner at this point as, they don't make the top 4 for Denver Harris. There's just, Toriano Pride probably going to Clemson if I had to guess right now, if you held my feet to the fire. What of that position?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting position to evaluate because back on January 2nd, after Jaheim Singletary committed to Ohio State, we were thinking about maybe potentially 2, possibly even a 3 5-star cornerback class for Ohio State, just because Damani Jackson was still on the board. Now he's committed to USC. Then Denver Harris as well was also a possibility for the Buckeyes, especially with Caleb Burton and Quinn Ewers being committed. The Lone Star State connections that they had to him. Some thought that Denver could have been a really high on Ohio State. He ended up leaving them out of his top 4 recently. So they're out of contention for right now when it comes to his recruitment. And then with Will Johnson, that's probably the toughest one because Johnson admitted that they were, in a recent interview with Josh Helmholtz, that Ohio State was indeed his leader after he took a visit to the school last fall. And that's tough because even though this was going to be a tough one to win from the very get-go, with him being from his father playing for the school up north and, how close he is to Ann Arbor and just all the connections that he had there to Michigan, it really seemed like Ohio State was going to have a shot there to land them. And I went on record on School Session, saying that that Ohio State would have been my pick after he took that USC visit. He ended up giving that new defensive staff in Michigan a chance to win him over and wow him, and apparently they did, and that led to his commitment yesterday. But you never know. I won't scratch him off the board just yet because of his close proximity to Ohio State. He's only a few hours away from Columbus. Also, what if the season happens and it's a season in which Jim Harbaugh and the Wolverines don't live up to standard? Ohio State wins yet again against Michigan, and Johnson decides that he wants in. I don't know what the class will look like at that point, but even if they're essentially done recruiting at cornerback, he's pretty much going to be a take from now on, just because of how talented he is and how Kerry Coombs believes he can develop under his system. But looking at some of the other options, it becomes a little bit thin after that. You mentioned Toriano Pride, but Clemson is doing a great job of recruiting him, and if he wants to commit at the end of the spring and isn't going to take any visits until then, which is what he told me yesterday, then Clemson would really be viewed as the favorite there, and they should be. Ryan Turner, recent offer out of Miramar, Florida. He's definitely an interesting one because after he got that offer from the Buckeyes, he told me that Ohio State is one of the top options in his recruitment. And we already know that the Buckeyes are capable of going into the Sunshine State and landing a defensive back, as we saw with Singletary a couple of months ago. So keep an eye out for him as well. Austin Jordan, a product out of Denton, Texas, included Ohio State in his top 10 last month. So we'll be paying attention to him as well. Other than that, though, it really does not seem like there's a guarantee cornerback that's going to commit to Ohio State. There's no slam dunk for them at the position right now. I like where things stand with them at safety when it comes to a guy like Xavier Nwakpa or Zion Branch. You know, they're looking really good for those players. So as it pertains to cornerback, it just doesn't look as good right now, outside of, you know, them holding on to commitments from Jaheim Singletary and Jair Brown.
It's funny. We talk about, oh, this could be an Ohio State class for the ages. And then we're like, well, we don't really know for sure what's going on at running back or at cornerback, even though, I mean, they do have two, you know, rivals 100 corner. Well, I mean, Singletary is a 5-star, and I don't have the rankings in front of me. I can get it pretty quick. I think Jair's out. He's 121. So, I mean, he's a 250 guy. You know, they certainly aren't hurting there, but, you know, there's so much going on with recruiting. And if you are listening to the show but not a member of Buckeye Grove, what are you waiting for? Sign up now. Get all of the great recruiting content from Joseph Hastings. We are announcing a new hire, maybe as soon as today. It's already kind of out there on the Twitters, but, you know, hoping to have a post on the board. We wish Andy Anders well as he moves on to a full-time job in Alabama as an editor for a sports section down there. But we never rest here at Buckeye Grove. We have already got a replacement in place, and we'll get him on the show here soon. But if you're not a member, get on board, check us out. A lot going on. And even though we're still sitting in this dead period, that doesn't mean that Joseph and I are going to be sitting idle. I have a feeling we'll be fueling up the family truckster here at some point, and while we can't see the kids coming here to Columbus, we can go out to the kids. So, you know, before I call it a show, any other things that you're working on, Joseph, or any other quick hitters as we're closing in on the 35-minute mark?
Yeah, so I'm getting ready later today, this afternoon, to post my Buckeye Grove Big Board breakdown for the 2022 running back. I'm just going to be taking a look at some of the options that we talked about, you know, Nicholas Singleton, Dallin Hayden, Lamar Olsen, and, you know, where things kind of stand with them and their recruitments at this time. You know, again, be touching on some of the things we talked about during this conversation. So stay tuned for that. You know, we really kind of emphasize these franchise pieces, you know, the film reviews on a weekly basis, recruiting roundtable on Tuesdays, and the 3-2-1s that I roll out on Thursday. So we're always going to continue to have recruiting content. And also, we're going to be catching up with some of the 2023 offers that Ohio State has, you know, gotten into the mix with recently. If you all have been paying attention to Twitter, you'll see that they really made it a point to start prioritizing that 2023 class and, you know, starting to offer some sophomore prospects. And if you remember, it was just less than a year ago when they added, you know, 3 of their first commits when they were in their sophomore years in terms of C.J. Hicks, Jair Brown Integra, Tishabola. So this could be a time when they start to prioritize that 2023 class and start accepting some commits and getting some prospects in the fold there. So there should be some good news coming soon on that end. I also hinted at some potentially more good news for the 2022 class in the latest goal session, which you can check out on BuckeyeGrove.com. So thank you, Kevin, once again for having me on, and I really appreciate it. And have fun setting up that PS5 today. I know you're excited that you got it in.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully my wife isn't listening to the podcast, which I know she's not. She doesn't care about recruiting, but she doesn't know that I bought a PS5. I've been trying to hide it, but it kind of is what it is. And I'll see if I can get it set up today after I get this podcast posted. But Joseph, thanks for being part of the show, and I want to thank everybody out there for listening. We couldn't do this without you, but be sure to join us over at BuckeyeGrove.com, as well as joining us here on the BIA Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, all of that good stuff on all of your favorite podcasting outlets. And we hope to be back with you here very soon with news as it happens. So for Joseph, I'm Kevin. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you here very soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to click on that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing, and come visit us over at BuckeyeGrove.com for all the best Ohio State information on the web.